This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier. Welcome to Washington. The Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare is being put to its first test, and now lawmakers are going to have to sell results that the Congressional Budget Office has put out that are being characterized as pretty rough. The report on the House health care plan and some of the numbers are giving fuel to critics. But the White House says the House bill will actually insure more people than currently covered. We're going to go over all the numbers, and in just a few minutes, House Speaker Paul Ryan will join us live with his reaction to the Congressional Budget Office report. But we begin with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, who joins us live from Capitol Hill tonight, where lawmakers are getting their first look at these numbers. Good evening, Mike.
Well, that's right, Brett. Good evening to you. The Congressional Budget Office projects 14 million people would lose health care coverage next year with this Republican health care proposal. By the year 2020, it estimates 21 million fewer people would have health care coverage. That number would grow to 24 million in the next decade. The CBO also predicts the GOP plan would decrease the budget deficit by $337 billion over a 10-year period. Senior Trump administration officials came out quickly to say they strenuously disagree with that coverage assessment.
We believe that the plan that we're putting in place is going to insure more individuals than currently are insured. So we think that CBO simply has it wrong.
Speaker Paul Ryan has been bracing for a bad projection because this Republican package doesn't force people to buy insurance. White House Budget Director noted the CBO was wrong on health care before.
If the CBO was right about Obamacare to begin with, there'd be 8 million more people on Obamacare today than there actually are.
This morning, the president predicted on Twitter the GOP will unite and blasted the current law. Obamacare is imploding. It is a disaster, and 2017 will be the worst year yet by far. Republicans will come together and save the day. Top Democrats are taking swipes at the president.
Like much of his administration thus far, Trump Care is another game of say one thing, do another.
One conservative critic said on Fox News Sunday the president is willing to cut a deal.
The president's been very clear that he wants negotiation. They're open to change. I hope they'll work with this. I hope they'll have the same. I hope the speaker and our leadership will have the same attitude the White House does, which is let's work together and find a plan that works for the American people.
And one Senate conservative urged Jordan and others in the House to hold the line.
Do not walk the plank and vote for a bill that cannot pass the Senate and then have to face the consequences of that vote.
But the president and Ryan have suggested failure to fix the problem could lead to a bloodbath.
I do believe that if we don't keep our word to the people who sent us here,
And this afternoon, the Senate Majority Leader reiterated the need to act.
Healthcare markets are teetering closer to the edge of collapse. The Obamacare status quo is simply not an option. We have an obligation to the American people to repeal and replace Obamacare.
The next step is the House Budget Committee is expected to take the two separate components that were assessed by House committees last week and combine them into one bill. It is still early here on Capitol Hill with people returning from their home districts, but it seems those who like the package found something to like in the CBO projection or disagree with it, and those who dislike it are still against the plan. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. House Speaker Paul Ryan has been selling and defending the Republican health care plan. He joins us from Janesville, Wisconsin tonight with reaction to the Congressional Budget Office's report. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being here. I tell you, the reaction early on the Hill it's a little stunned at the number of people who would be uninsured, saying that 24 million by 2026 would be uninsured relative to the current law. So your reaction on these numbers and what they mean?
Well, actually, I think if you read this entire report, I'm pretty encouraged by it, and it actually exceeded my expectations. Brett, Tom Price and Mick Mulvaney there mentioned the estimates before were that 25 million people would be on Obamacare today, less than half that are. But look at what they said, the reason why they think this uninsured would happen. We're saying the government's not going to force people to buy something they don't want to buy. And if we end an Obamacare mandate that says you must buy this government one-size-fits-all plan, guess what? People aren't going to buy that. So of course they're going to suggest that if we're not going to make people do something they don't want to do, they're not going to do it. That's really what's behind this. What I'm encouraged is once our reforms kick in, what the CBO is telling us is it's going to lower premiums. It will lower premiums 10%. It stabilizes the market. It's a $1.2 trillion spending cut, an $883 billion tax cut and $337 billion in deficit reduction. So of course the CBO is going to say, if you're not going to force people to buy something they don't want to buy, they won't buy it. But at the same time, they're saying our reforms will kick in and lower premiums and make healthcare therefore more accessible. And by the way, Bret, I just want to say one more thing, then I'll stop talking. This is just part one of a three-part plan, and that's why I'm excited. Just this, they say, lowers premiums, stabilizes the market, gives people more choice and freedom. Part two is Tom Price at HHS brings more choice and competition, lets the states open up markets, which will lower prices even more. In part three are the other bills that we will be passing: interstate shopping across state lines, association healthcare plans to let people bulk buy insurance nationwide, medical liability reform. Those will drop premiums even further and make healthcare even more accessible than what CBO is encouraging in an encouraging way, saying as well.
Mr. Speaker, in this report, the CBO says that basically you have to wait until 2026 to see costs go down. Who's going to wait that long?
That's not true. They say costs start going down in 2020 when our reforms kick in. As you know, we're doing a transition period because we don't want to pull the rug out from under anybody. We want to make sure that people can still have coverage and there's a seamless transition from a collapsing system to a better system, which they say starting in 2020 stabilizes the market and brings premiums down. But don't forget one thing here. Obamacare is in the middle of a collapse. Only 5 states have one insurer left. Over 1,000 counties in America have only one insurer left. Humana just announced that they're pulling out. That means 0 plans in 2018 for those people. And oh, by the way, we just got a letter from Anthem, one of the biggest insurers in America, that are telling us if the status quo stays, they're going to surgically pull out of markets as well. So put this against the backdrop that Obamacare is collapsing. The insurers are telling us the premium increases we got just this year from Obamacare, 25% on average, will be even higher next year. So this, compared to the status quo, is far better. I'm excited about this analysis. And yeah, I think they sort of overestimate the uninsured number, just like they overestimated who would be insured by Obamacare. But I do believe that if we're not going to force people to buy something they don't want to buy, they won't buy it. And that's kind of obvious.
All right. Well, here is the president today talking about health care and the negotiations.
The House plan will expand choice, lower costs, and ensure health care access for all. We're negotiating with everybody. It's a big, fat, beautiful negotiation. And hopefully we'll come up with something that's going to be really terrific.
But isn't it true that there is not such a big, fat, beautiful negotiation, because you can't negotiate and still get in the reconciliation vehicle in order to have only 51 votes necessary to pass in the Senate? You don't have a lot of wiggle room here as far as what you can negotiate with on this first bill. Is that true?
Well, yeah, the first bill, that's exactly right. So what the president's talking about is our three-pronged approach that I just described. So we're looking at all the other bills that we want to pass, that we can pass, that are outside of reconciliation, and all the things that the government can do at the Health and Human Services Secretary HHS's control to expand the market and deregulate and bring more choice and competition. And still we're making fine-tuning touches to this reconciliation bill, working on getting that consensus among our members in the House and the Senate to make sure that we make this the best possible legislation. Now that we have this encouraging score from the CBO, this gives us even more room to work on to make good fine-tuning finishing touches on this bill as it moves through the 4-committee process. We've gone through 2 committees, we've got 2 more to go, and then on to the Senate. So this is a good work in progress. We're extremely excited about this, and I'm really actually frankly encouraged. Even CBO is telling us we stabilize the market, we lower premiums, it lowers the deficit, it saves money. And more importantly, of course, they're going to say if we're going to stop forcing people to buy something they don't want to buy, they're not going to buy it.
Okay.
That's why you have those uninsured numbers, which we all expected.
Mr. Speaker, if you're encouraged by this CBO report, what's a CBO report you're discouraged by?
No, I've seen a lot. I've been reading them all half my life. But the point I'm saying is what CBO did was they validated. We are block granting Medicaid back to the states, saving $880 billion right there. This is an $883 billion tax cut for families and small businesses that helps lower their health care costs. And it saves money and reduces the deficit. So that's really good on all those points. But what the CBO is also telling us, by having state-based high-risk pools, by having free tax credits, free meaning you can buy what you want, tax credits, and more house savings accounts. They're telling us our reforms stabilize the market and lower premiums when those reforms take place. And you juxtapose that against a collapsing Obamacare system, double-digit premium increases this year. It's going to get worse next year. Very few plans being offered, down to one plan in 1 out of 3 counties. 0 plans in some places next year. So we're witnessing the collapse of Obamacare. And what CBO is telling us is that this replacement plan actually stabilizes the situation, brings down costs. And this is just stage 1 of a 3-stage process to make it even better. That's why I'm encouraged.
Understanding what you're saying about Obamacare and what you're saying the insurance companies are telling you, we asked for people to write in on Twitter, ask questions. Talk Doc asks, if we pass no plan and let the Obamacare stand right now, can tax reform still happen?
No, it actually makes it extremely complicated. It puts us about $1 trillion further down the path or away from doing tax reform. So it's a very important point. We can't get to the next budget either, which is where tax reform is done. So it really would gum up the works, and it would make tax reform that much harder to achieve because we'd have all these Obamacare taxes to deal with as well.
All right, I want to ask you about one of your members of your caucus, Congressman Steve King, who tweeted out about Geert Wilders. Wilders understands that culture and demographics are our destiny. We can't restore our civilization without somebody else's babies. He tried to explain that today in an interview. Your thoughts on that and your reaction to it?
Well, I disagree with that statement. I haven't seen the context, but I disagree that we're a melting pot. Look, my family's here because the potatoes stopped growing in Ireland. This is what's beautiful about the American idea. We're a melting pot where people come from all walks of life all around the world to seek freedom, to seek a better life. The American idea is this beautiful idea that is there for everyone, which is that your condition, your birth doesn't determine the outcome of your life. And so I really do believe in the American system of our values, our principles, and the melting pot that it has produced. And that is what's make America great. So I don't think that statement reflects what is special about this country. I would like to think, and I haven't spoken to Steve about this, I'd like to think that he misspoke and it wasn't really meant the way that sounds, and hopefully he's clarified that.
Okay, and finally, last time I was with you, I asked you about reports that there was surveillance potentially on the Trump campaign. You answered in a different kind of way. Since then, there's been this uproar about President Trump's tweets about this. Today was a deadline on the House for hearing results from the Justice Department about where this wiretapping is coming from, and so far we haven't heard any response. Do you know of anything about this, and what do you think of this deadline? Should they produce some evidence of it?
Yeah, so I've asked the Intelligence Committee to conduct an investigation to thoroughly scrub this matter, and they're in the middle of that investigation. I don't know whether or not DOJ met their deadline or not. But I did ask the Intelligence Committee, both the Democrats and the Republicans, they're doing this together, to investigate this thoroughly. I have been briefed on the matter, and I have seen no evidence that the tap occurred. That's what I think I was asked this weekend by Dickerson.
Yeah, so no evidence that you've seen so far.
Correct.
Okay.
But again, I don't want to get ahead of the Intelligence Committee. The Intelligence Committee is going to do a thorough investigation on the whole matter.
Mr. Speaker, we appreciate your time. Always welcome.
You bet. Take care, Bret.
For analysis of the efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare, we turn to Fox News senior political analyst Bret Hume. Good evening, Bret. You just heard that. The Speaker saying that these are encouraging numbers.
Well, he makes a pretty good case, I think, that this measure that he's working on and the others that will come after it, apparently, will be a lot better than the status quo, which is a collapsing system. But the eye-popping number on the number of people who will remain or become uninsured, obviously, is something that the Republicans promoting this plan are going to have. They're going to be beaten over the head with that number as if it were a rolled-up newspaper. And my sense is that this number was expected. And the question then becomes, okay, can they pass it through the House, get it over to the Senate, and let the Senate work with it to try to find something that can pass over there? And I would point you, Bret, toward that interview that yesterday that you just showed a portion of in Mike Emanuel's piece with Jim Jordan of Ohio, who is very much a leader of the conservatives in the House, very much a leader of the Freedom Caucus, in which he was asked by Chris Wallace repeatedly, would he vote no on this plan if that's what comes to the House floor? And I think there's been a widespread assumption that he and most of the members of the Freedom Caucus would vote no, but he wouldn't say that. He ducked the question repeatedly. And I thought that was telling, because I think when it gets down to it, it may come to this choice, a binary choice: leave the status quo in place and thereby, go back on all campaign promises, or vote this thing out in the recognition that that won't be the final thing that comes back for the ultimate final vote.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people up on the Hill who say the House, potentially gets it through, but that the real challenge comes in the Senate, where the margin is very slim to get that 51 votes. You can only lose a couple of senators to get to 50, and the vice president breaks that vote. One of the things over there is that you don't have a lot of leeway, and that's what I was asking the speaker. There's not a lot of negotiation on this first bill. They can talk about all kinds of things down 2 and 3 phases.
Well, the thing I think, Bret, that they have to be most concerned about keeping in the bill are the tax credits, which are what furnish the funds to help people who might lose their coverage, their old Obamacare coverage, which they may or may not have liked, by the way, but they would lose it and would be not in a position with their own finances to buy a different plan. And so those tax credits are in place there to do that, and it's kind of central to the whole measure. And also the cost savings that you mentioned are also central to the measure as well. There's got to be some, whatever compromise the Senate comes up with, or whatever rewritten bill the Senate comes up with, is going to have to keep that stuff in mind, because a lot of other things, as Paul Ryan pointed out to you, that are supposed to come later, tax reform and other things, are dependent on getting this building block in place. And so they're going to need to figure out a way to do that. We got a long way to go here, Bret. Yeah. We're in the early stages. After all, not only does a bill have to pass the House, then something that might be quite different has to pass the Senate, and then they got to negotiate a compromise between them that could somehow go back and pass both houses. So we're in an early stage here, and this reminds me of the old days, Bret, when you used to legislate and there were compromises along the way and the perils of Pauline, and we haven't had that in so long that I sense that a lot of journalists have forgotten what it's like. Well, this is what it's like.
When was the last conference committee, right? Bret, as
think
always,
about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will turn around the sound from the Speaker, the Minority Leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, about their thoughts a little bit later. The other big story of the day, the East Coast bracing for a blast of winter as a nor'easter begins to make its way from our nation's capital to Maine. The storm could dump up to 18 inches of snow in some spots, with blizzard-like conditions forecasted. The storm is already affecting travel, as you can imagine. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has the latest tonight on the impact of this late-season storm.
Residents in and around Chicago received up to 6 inches of snow on Sunday and Monday, prompting the delay or cancellation of some 500 flights at Midway and O'Hare airports, key transit hubs for airlines across the country.
I'm a heavy business traveler, so I'm actually going to be traveling to Chicago. Oh, no. So I'm really worried whether I'll make it.
In Waukesha, Wisconsin, and other counties near Milwaukee, authorities issued a lake effect warning as they brace for a total of 8 to 15 inches by Tuesday. In pockets of Minnesota, residents reported driving conditions of zero visibility.
Snow is guaranteed in March. They call it March Madness, and we have it, whether it's a hockey tournament or whatever. We'll get 8-10 inches.
Traveling without impediment was the nor'easter itself, which was scheduled to hit the East Coast by late Monday.
And we see this sweep across the East Coast through the Northeast, eventually running up towards Maine. The big concerns here, very heavy snow, and with it, very windy conditions. And that's when you start to see these blizzard-like conditions.
Major East Coast cities from Washington and Philadelphia to New York and Boston were forecasting upwards of a foot of snow, with travel ground to a halt and down power lines expected to impact tens of thousands. And at this hour, the travel website FlightAware.com is reporting that some 4,600 flights scheduled for Tuesday have now been canceled, and those cancellations indeed are now starting to stretch into Wednesday. In all, a reminder from the heavens that if you want to see what an honest-to-God travel ban looks like, try 18 inches of snow, Bret.
All right, James Rosen live at Reagan National Airport. James, thank you. Up next, the wiretap answers that came today from the Trump administration. The cost to clean up 3 Dakota Access oil pipeline protest camps could cost taxpayers more than $1 million. The Army Corps of Engineers says 835 industrial-sized trash bins were filled during the cleanup, not including lumber and propane tanks that were also removed. Protesters came by the hundreds last year to protest the pipeline that they believe will impact drinking water and disturb sacred tribal sites. As mentioned before, it is deadline day for the Trump administration to provide proof that the president's New York officers were wiretapped ahead of November's election. Going back to the president's tweets about that, so far no evidence has been offered. And as Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reports, some in the administration are putting a spin on what the president meant when he accused the Obama administration and President Obama of spying.
With a looming deadline to provide relevant documents about alleged wiretapping to Congress, the White House spokesman said the president's tweets March 4th about the election was not meant literally.
The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities during that.
Asked if the White House instructed the Justice Department to provide records by close of business Monday, Spicer went on the offensive.
It's interesting, in the past, whenever we've had these conversations with another agency, the accusation from the press corps is that we're interfering in something. So you can't have it both ways.
Speaking to a New Jersey newspaper, presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway suggested surveillance could be widespread after WikiLeaks posted documents alleging the CIA can turn phones and televisions into recording devices. Today, Conway dialed back.
I'm not Inspector Gadget. I don't believe people are using the microwave to spy on the Trump campaign. However, I'm not in the job of having evidence. That's what investigations are for.
On the Sunday talk shows, a leading Republican and critic of the president said the evidence or lack of evidence will be telling.
I think the president has one of two choices: either retract or to provide the information that the American people deserve, because if his predecessor violated the law, President Obama violated the law, we've got a serious issue here.
The House Intelligence Committee deadline comes 1 week before the first public hearing on the Russia investigation, where current and former administration officials, including FBI Director James Comey, are invited witnesses. The committee's ranking Democrat believes the FBI director may be eager to testify.
If the press reports are accurate that he asked the Department of Justice to knock this down and they refused for whatever reason, he may welcome the opportunity, but he'll certainly have that on March 20th.
Meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman has confirmed the Russian ambassador also met with Hillary Clinton's advisors.
People lose track of what Russia's engagement and their reason for engagement with the election really is. It's not to try to have one candidate win over the other. It's to destabilize the entire process.
The White House spokesman said today that they believe the Justice Department will comply with the congressional request for wiretapping documents. And late today, we confirmed that they did ask the committee for more time, Bret.
Let alone if the government shuts down tomorrow because of the snow.
If there is snow, it'll kick it down the road a little further.
Never know. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
President Trump held his first official meeting with his cabinet today, despite missing 4 members that have yet to be approved by the U.S. Senate. It wasn't the only thing on the president's plate today. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us live from the North Lawn with the latest. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. We should point out, too, Brett, that it just started snowing here outside the White House. The president taking aim today at Democrats for accusing them of holding up the last 4 nominees for his cabinet, and in the face of renewed Democratic opposition to his health care plan, dug in for the fight. Meeting for the first time with his almost complete cabinet, President Trump kept up the urgent sales pitch to repeal and replace Obamacare, indicating the final bill may be substantially different than the one voted out of committee.
It's a big, fat, beautiful negotiation, and hopefully we'll come up with something that's going to be really terrific.
The beneficiary of a new health care plan will be the American people, the president insisted, today holding a listening session with people he billed as victims of Obamacare.
We are cattle ranchers. We can't afford our equipment if we're paying these rates year after year after year. Our food source is in jeopardy because of this health care law. It's my basic.
I know. It's all right. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Before it was even released, the press secretary today dismissed the assessment from the Congressional Budget Office, arguing that the CBO has been wildly inaccurate when it comes to health care.
The CBO was off by more than half last time. So this is not about what my understanding or my belief of the CBO is. The last time they did this, they were wildly off.
The White House was also pushing back today on the Saturday firing of Preet Bharara, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
This is a standard operating procedure for a new administration around this time to ask for the resignation of all the U.S. attorneys. We had most of them, or a good chunk of them, had already submitted their resignation letter. This is just the final swath of individuals who had not at this time.
It is common practice for the Attorney General to ask political appointees to resign. In 1993, Janet Reno asked for then U.S. Attorney Jeff Sessions to step down. But the president had made a point of asking Bharara to stick around.
I said I would absolutely consider staying on. I agreed to stay on. I have already spoken to Senator Sessions, who is, as you know, the nominee to be the Attorney General. He also asked that I stay on.
Then on Friday, Bharara and the 45 remaining U.S. attorneys were asked to submit letters of resignation. When he didn't, Bharara was fired. Adding to the intrigue, the president had put in a call to Bharara 2 days before he was canned.
Did the president change his mind?
No, the president was calling to thank him for his service. This is a standard, as I said, a standard action that takes place at most administrations.
The U.S. attorneys will be replaced by new hires. The president is looking to eliminate at least some positions across the administration, signing a new executive order today to investigate government efficiency, which may end up consolidating some jobs and getting rid of others. Bret?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. A mixed day on Wall Street today. The Dow was down 21.5. The S&P 500 up nearly a point. The Nasdaq finished ahead 14. Another fight is mounting over President Trump's second executive order on travel. More than a dozen states are now asking the courts to stop the latest ban from going into effect midnight Thursday. Tonight, correspondent Dan Springer reports on round 2 of the president's travel ban fight.
President Donald Trump's revised travel ban is scheduled to take effect in 3 days, but before then it will need to clear 2 legal challenges filed by a growing number of states. Hawaii is seeking a temporary restraining order to block the executive order.
It's saying if you're from one of these 6 countries, now 6, you are presumptively a terrorist.
The lawsuit claims Imam Ismail el-Sheikh, an American citizen, now can't bring his Syrian mother-in-law to the U.S. But government lawyers argue the revised travel ban is much more narrow than the first and provides for waivers on a case-by-case basis. Oral arguments will be heard Wednesday by Federal District Court Judge Derek Watson, who was appointed by President Obama. Meantime, Washington State has now been joined by 5 others: Oregon, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, and California, in its effort to have the nationwide injunction that was slapped on Trump's original travel ban be extended to the Executive Order 2.0. Judge James Robart will make that decision. His injunction drew angry tweets from President Trump, but was upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, perhaps not coincidentally, the same court that will likely have to rule again.
They target judges who they believe are going to give them a favorable ruling. They try to bring these cases in circuits where they're most likely to have these injunctions upheld.
At the heart of the state's cases are calls made by then-candidate Trump for a ban on Muslims coming into the U.S. But Department of Justice lawyers, citing Supreme Court rulings, contend candidates are not government actors, and statements of what they might attempt to achieve if elected, which are often simplified and imprecise, are not official acts.
Okay. There is simply no basis for the court to assume that because he said something as a candidate, that is the reason he's doing something as the president. And there's no historical basis for that.
Government lawyers will now have to respond by tomorrow with a motion to lift the injunction on that revoked travel ban. A flurry of legal briefs aimed at getting a decision before Thursday's deadline. Bret?
Dan Springer in Seattle. Dan, thank you. Secretary Rex Tillerson will make his first trip to Asia as Secretary of State this week, less than a week after North Korea test launched 4 ballistic missiles and amid ongoing controversy over the South China Sea. Correspondent Doug McKelway reports tonight on the challenges facing the new administration.
As Secretary of State Rex Tillerson jets off to meetings in Japan, South Korea, and China tomorrow, regional tensions are rising with the pace of North Korea's new missile testing.
These missiles are flying into the ocean, but if you actually map the ranges out, they correspond to U.S. military bases and to ports where we would bring reinforcements.
The State Department today confirmed that the U.S. is now deploying upgraded Gray Eagle armed drones to South Korea, in addition to high-altitude defensive missiles. That, as Japan's Prime Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sends his country's newest, largest warship, the helicopter carrier Izumo, into the South China Sea. The State Department and Tillerson searching for a way to de-escalate tensions.
What are next steps we can take to really put pressure on the regime to make them feel and pay a price for their behavior.
Adding to regional tensions, China's man-made islands in the South China Sea. In 2015, President Xi made this promise from the Rose Garden.
China does not intend to pursue militarization.
18 months later, the islands have runways, are protected with anti-aircraft guns, and may be the destination for hundreds of sophisticated surface-to-air missiles recently deployed to nearby Hainan Island. Meanwhile, President Trump at home faces another foreign policy challenge. A weather-related postponement of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's visit tomorrow won't put off a reckoning over differences on immigration, the future of the European Union, and trade. The reality is Germany exports twice as many goods to the U.S. as the U.S. exports to Germany. One potential highlight this week, President Trump will be hosting the Saudi Crown Prince bin Salman. The Saudis have long been adversaries of Iran, but they see new hope in the Trump administration's opposition to the Iran nuclear deal. Bret?
Doug McKelway at the State Department. Doug, thank you. Next up, the panel's take on Speaker Paul Ryan's hopes to repeal and replace Obamacare, backed up, of course, by President Trump. A look at the CBO report, the numbers, and the impact.
So, of course, the CBO is going to say, if you're not going to force people to buy something they don't want to buy, they won't buy it. But at the same time, they're saying our reforms will kick in and lower premiums and make healthcare therefore more accessible.
10 years from today, if President Trump and the Republicans have their way, there would be 24 million more Americans without health insurance, total of 58 million Americans living in this country 10 years from now will not have health coverage. That's un-American. That's wrong.
Chuck Schumer reacting to the CBO numbers out today. Congressional Budget Office, just to put up some stats from that report about the Republican plan. First, the effects on the federal budget. The GOP bill would reduce federal deficits by $337 billion over 2017 to 2026. Largest savings coming from reductions in Medicaid. Largest cost would come from repealing many of the tax increases and fees changed under Obamacare. Outlays would be reduced by $1.2 trillion. Revenues would be reduced by $0.9 trillion. Now the effects on health insurance coverage. These are the numbers that Democrats obviously are jumping on. 2018, 14 million more people would be uninsured under this legislation than the current law. 2020, that goes to 21 million. 2026, 24 million more uninsured. So you have a lot of numbers there. Then CBO report effect on premiums. 2018 and 2019, this bill would tend to increase the average premiums in the non-group market. The average premiums for single holders would be 15 to 20% higher, but then it would turn and lower them by roughly 10% by 2026 than the current law. I know it's a lot of numbers and people glaze over, but those are the stats and the figures from this report. What does it all mean? Let's bring in our panel. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Hadass Gold, media reporter for Politico. And Byron York, chief political correspondent of The Washington Examiner. Everybody's all scared of the snow, but I tell you, there are some Republicans, Molly, that are scared of this report, and they knew it was going to be bad. Speaker Ryan says he's encouraged.
Well, it's saying in this plan it would be cheaper and it would lead to lower premiums, but a higher number of uninsured people relative to Obamacare, which had a lower number of uninsured people but was much more expensive. But there's also an issue of just CBO estimates. They're very notoriously bad. And think back to 2010 when they said that under Obamacare you'd have 23 million Americans insured. It's actually 12 million this year. And they also made a forecasting error, so they dramatically underestimated the cost of Medicaid. So we need to keep these things in mind as we are talking about this scoring as well.
Yeah, and it's also important to point out, Hadass, that as they pitch it, it is a three-phase thing, whether that's realistic or not. The second phase is Secretary Price of HHS. Here is his reaction outside the White House this afternoon.
They also ignored completely the other legislative activities that we'll be putting into place that will make certain that we have an insurance market that actually works. So we disagree strenuously with the report that was put out. We believe that our plan will cover more individuals at a lower cost and give them the choices that they want, for the coverage that they want for themselves and for their family, not that the government forces them to buy.
So just to translate, they are saying they're going to put in some of these market incentives in the third phase, which would be another piece of legislation.
Right, and I mean, this CBO report seems as though there's something in it for everybody to hate, in a way, and it was a little bit confusing because we have the administration folks coming out saying they strenuously disagree. Then we have Paul Ryan and his staff tweeting out all these things that they really like about it. What's really interesting that I didn't realize until today was that Tom Price actually is the one who put the current CBO director in his position, Keith Hall, and so there's a history there as well. But clearly, with all of these numbers, it's really hard for a lot of people, I would guess, everyday people who don't follow this every day, to follow. And what's going to be hard to sell is to get over those numbers the Democrats are going to be pushing, that these millions of people are going to be losing their insurance potentially.
What we don't hear from the Democrats, however, Byron, is what their solution is as Obamacare is collapsing, and we hear that insurance companies are going to leave this year.
Well, during the campaign, Hillary Clinton and other Democrats gave their solution, which was more federal funding for it. But look, I give Paul Ryan an A for effort in that interview with you by saying this is really great, but it's a terrible report. The idea of losing 24 million people off the coverage rolls, voluntarily or otherwise, is a bad thing. And even if they're off by half, it's still a bad thing. And Ryan is trying to turn this into some sort of positive good by saying, well, this is what freedom looks like. You know, Obamacare offered people a bad product which they didn't want to buy, and we're going to offer them a product which more of them won't want to buy. It's not a solution, which I think what is going to happen is, if this thing can pass in the House, it does go over to the Senate, where they just rewrite the whole darn thing and see what happens then.
Here is Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas this weekend.
Do not walk the plank and vote for a bill that cannot pass the Senate and then have to face the consequences of that vote. I'm afraid that if they vote for this bill, they're going to put the House majority at risk next year.
Democrats call this the BTUing. The House votes for something that's unpopular. At that point, it was a BTU tax increase. And then the Senate doesn't pass it, and then those House people who voted for it fall on their swords in the next election, which comes every 2 years. Can Republicans make this a binary choice? If you do this, fine. If you don't, you are essentially letting Obamacare collapse, and we can't move forward.
Well, they're certainly trying to make it into a binary choice, but they're not dealing with any of the underlying problems that anyone in the Republican caucus that opposes this bill seems to have. And just even on something as simple as Medicaid expansion, when you're looking at how you've had all these we have all these proposals for putting everybody onto Medicaid expansion. We haven't even looked at whether health care insurance is the same thing as health care. And you look at the landmark Medicaid study in Oregon that showed that when you were on Medicaid, you had no better health outcomes than if you had no insurance at all. There are other studies that show that that you might even have worse healthcare outcomes if you are not on Medicaid, if you have no insurance, than if you have Medicaid. Nothing in here, nothing about the CBO estimate, nothing that we're talking about actually deals with these large-scale structural problems. And if people are going to have to lose elections over this, it would be nice if they at least had something worthwhile to be losing over. And I don't think this is what they're being offered.
Here is President Trump at the White House today.
The House bill to repeal and replace Obamacare will provide you and your fellow citizens with more choices, far more choices, at lower cost. Americans should pick the plan they want. Now they'll be able to pick the plan they want. They'll be able to pick the doctor they want. And I tell Paul Ryan, I tell every one of them, I say the best thing you can do politically is wait a year, because it's going to blow itself off the map. But that's the wrong thing to do for the country. It's the wrong thing to do for our citizens.
Adding to that a tweet, Hadass, Obamacare is imploding. It is a disaster. 2017 will be the worst year yet by far. Republicans will come together and save the day. The question is how much President Trump is going to put into this effort to get it across the finish line.
That's the real question. I'm actually surprised the man who is the king of branding, he put his name on steaks and ties and everything else, we don't really hear his name attached to this health care bill as much.
Well, Democrats do say Trump care a lot.
They do. But but the administration, I've heard varying things about it. I think what Trump is probably paying attention to and is keeping an eye on is what his base is reacting to. And we're already seeing some of them come out in, talk radio land, on certain sites, on certain people who have established themselves as part of the hardcore Trump base, not being big fans of this. And I'm sure he is seeing them describe it as Obamacare light. And that's not something that he probably likes to see.
Some of the biggest fans are calling it Ryan Care, actually. Byron,
probably more accurate. I think the Republicans created this problem for themselves when they talked for 7 years about repealing every single word of Obamacare. Now they're in power, they have a Republican president, they actually have to do it, and they never, in that time, until now, agreed on an actual plan to do it. And now you actually see why they didn't. It was very hard, and they didn't really have a good plan. So here again, I think you're going to see, and this happened with Obamacare as well, a bill going from the House to the Senate and getting really rewritten.
Percent of chance that something gets through Congress to President Trump's desk?
75. That's high. 55.
I'm not making any bets.
Oh, you're like in the Steve Hayes chair. That's what he does. You're not allowed to do that. Next up, where we go from here on the wiretap claims and the U.S. Attorney story.
President Trump has to provide the American people, not just the Intelligence Committee, but the American people with evidence that his predecessor, former President of the United States, was guilty of breaking the law.
He doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally. I think, but I think there's no question that the Obama administration, that there were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities.
We're going to have an open hearing on March 20th. We're going to be able to ask the director of the FBI, among others, is there any truth to this? Have they seen any evidence of this? But I don't think anyone really has any question about this, George. The only question is why the president would make up such a thing.
Well, this wiretapping question, the tweets, and asking for evidence. Late this afternoon, the Department of Justice issued a statement saying this afternoon the DOJ placed calls to representatives of the chairman and ranking member of the United States House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to ask for additional time to review the request in compliance with the governing legal authorities and to determine what, if any, responsive documents may exist. We're back with the panel. Where do we go?
Well, I think the fact is you're going to find there's no evidence that Barack Obama ordered a wiretap on Donald Trump. I just don't think that happened. But there were a lot of wiretaps in this case. Go through some of the big news-breaking stories on Russia over the past 6 months and look for the word intercept or intercepted. Almost all of the scoops that we had were based on intercepted phone calls, intercepted financial transactions, other intercepted electronic communications. There are a lot of wiretaps flowing around. Now, the intelligence community says, well, these were wiretaps of foreign persons, Russian ambassador, Russians in Russia, that inadvertently picked up a U.S. person on the other end. Well, it'd be interesting to see what all of these are. So I do think Trump, by making this claim, and he always goes too far, by making this claim is going to lead us to a little more understanding of this case.
Hadass.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where this goes, and I think it's going to keep going for a long time. It's not going to die for a while. I'm keeping my eye on the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee. They've already said that they are willing to pull out of this investigation if they don't feel as though it's being done properly, but pulling their support would obviously sacrifice their role in something that they have said is vitally important to our democracy. So they're in a really interesting position here, and whether they pull out, I think that would be a really huge blow to what they're trying to do.
Byron mentioned, Molly, the Russian ambassador and contacts and all the questions surrounding that. Here is the Vladimir Putin's press secretary.
If you look at some people connected with Hillary Clinton during her campaign, you would probably see that he had lots of meetings of that kind, but there were no meetings about electoral process. It was in no way it should be perceived as interference in electoral process.
saying that the Russian ambassador met with Clinton's people too.
And isn't that interesting? The whole reason why we have this story is because we've been party to a selective leak operation on the part of intelligence officials. They have been leading people to believe there's something nefarious between Trump and Russia. It is high time for people to either put up or shut up, or just let the investigation continue. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes says he's looking into Russian ties, also looking into this political operation of leaking, and we need to let people do their work and find out, get to the bottom of it.
Meantime, the U.S. attorneys who were asked for their resignation, 46 of them, it has been quite a story, and yet the perspective, Byron, seems to have been lost over the years.
It really does. First of all, the person who said that all 94 U.S. attorneys got their notice on November 8th, that's true. It was, if you're appointed by Barack Obama, you're a U.S. attorney, you're going to leave with the new Republican president. So more than half of them had already done that. And then now Trump gets rid of the rest of them, and a lot of the press coverage acted as if there were only one U.S. attorney who were being fired, in this case, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Bret Baier. But this is absolutely routine, and there's nothing unusual about it.
Final word?
It is routine, except I think the way in which it was done, it was incredibly fast. They were told to vacate their offices by midnight. In previous years, yes, you're right, they had all been switched over, but it was in sort of more of a staggered way. And also with Bret Baier, I mean, he was asked initially to stay on and for them to say suddenly, you should go. But you're right, I do think that it is a normal thing, and it's, I think we had a column today, they called it the canonization of Bret Baier, which was perhaps pretty apt.
There you go. That's it for Special Report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Tucker's got a big interview on Wednesday.